Good morning, everybody. Let's start with the future of our university. This is indeed the first inspiration session. We have quite a few of them in the next 3 months. And the idea is that we look at inspiration and orientation. So the idea is about the future and it's about impact. So what we want to have is kind of divergent opinions, bold visions of the future, and also see how we can have real impact in the future. For this we have these sessions, but also much more activities, and the idea is that this will allow you to give input to our strategy of the future. Now first of all, we don't want to only look inside, we also want to look outside. That's why we invited a lot of external people to these inspiration sessions, but also we value very much your input. So the idea is that of course you can give input during this session, but you also afterwards will get a link through an email, at least if you have registered, to which you also can give further comments to what we're doing. So what we really want to do with these inspiration sessions is inspire each other, be critical, but also be open-minded. Now if you look at the process of shaping 2030, the idea is that we want to have a vision. And the vision should be ambitious, but also should prepare us somehow for the future. And not only we want to be prepared for the future, we also want to shape the future. So that's really a big ambition. On the more short term, we want to have a strategy that's as specific as possible, but somehow also not forget about the mission in 10 years. Okay, if you look at the schedule, so it all has to be done within 1 year. It was kind of kick-off during the breakfast, New Year's breakfast. Our president then kind of officially kicked it off. The first 3 months from January to March we look for inspiration, orientation, evaluation. So also we look at the previous vision and see what has happened to that. We have these inspiration sessions, we collect all kinds of things, and then the second months from April to June we look at creation and writing. So there will be a kind of phase where we really construct our mission and our vision, also the strategy. And then the second part of the year will be devoted to kind of consultation and decision. So indeed it's our hope that by the end of this year we really will have this all finished. But for the moment, let's go to our inspiration, but that's really what it's about. It's nice that you have turned up by so many people. We first had a smaller room, but we had to go to a bigger room. So now I want to introduce Maarten van Steen, who's going to moderate this session. And we will start with doing a kind of poll about what do you think yourself already in 2030 that your work should be radically different from now due to big data and digitalization developments. But maybe first Maarten can start and I will start our poll.
Yeah, you're going to start the... because it's... Can I do without the mic? Yes, that's good. I can do without the mic. I cannot do without the mic because otherwise... Okay, I got my hands full now, so I got a problem here. Anyway, while Joost is setting up our game, I have the pleasure to actually introduce to you Sander Klous. Sander is a data and analytics leader at KPMG, meaning that he's on top of many big data issues that KPMG is encountering with its customers. He's also a professor of big data economics, of ecosystems I should say, for business and society in the University of Amsterdam. And as we just discussed, he's one of those professors who just does research. And we all consider that doing research is just really part of the job, right? Otherwise I'm not going to say anything about that. Now, interestingly, if you look up Sander on the web, you'll find that he has a background in high energy physics with links to CERN. You can ask him later how you can get from CERN to big data analysts and also about the type of things that he'll be talking about today. Now, Sander and I, we met each other, I guess, a few years ago when we were trying to set up a joint proposal on doing Wi-Fi analytics, all the stuff that's is actually forbidden, I guess, at the moment. But it's interesting because I can still recall the weekends that we were only, I guess, at a certain point, the two of us were working on the proposal, in the sense that I was hacking Excel sheets so that every change in, if somebody came up with, oh, I want to do that much, and I had to automate all the Excel sheets because it was a hassle to get the financing going. So I spent a couple of weekends doing that. And in the meantime, Sander was hanging on the phone to get all the partners on the right track. The project proposal didn't make it in the end, but I still consider this as a kind of a fun thing, and I think we developed a mutual trust in, okay, let's just go for it and see how far we can get. Okay, I've come to know Sander as a very strong thinker, and watch out, a provocative thinker, or a teaser as you may like. So be prepared. I have no doubt that he'll do an excellent job in actually teasing us today, and I would say be prepared. Listen and absorb. Sander, the floor is yours. What? Oh, wait a minute. And we have to do. Okay. This is important. Can somebody record the because it will go away in just a minute, I guess. Hij onthoudt het. Oh, we have an intelligent system here. Okay, so this is interesting. Maybe not just the 53 versus the 16 at the moment, but we'll be asking this question after this session again. And probably the most interesting thing is to see what this session does to your opinion. Okay, so now we can actually measure, I think, to what extent you are being inspired by Sander. No, that's Joost, but you can use that one. Apparently you need it. Oh, well, I just grabbed the one, but this is yours, Joost, right?
This is yours? Okay.
We'll figure this out later.
Well, you know it, I have it in my pocket.
Okay, I'm done for now. So watch this. It's being recorded, and we'll
so if this doesn't work, I'll just use the regular mic. Yes. Okay. So first of all, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I hope that my presentation is somewhere on this machine. Yes, here it is. And the reason why I do these sessions is actually to sell my book. So I wrote two books. The first one is called We Are Big Data. It's actually quite old already. It's end of 2014. English version is 2015. It made it as runner-up of the Management Book of the Year awards in 2015. And it's one of the best-sold books on big data in the Netherlands. But the new one is maybe more interesting even for the topic that we are discussing today. It was launched December last year. All my books are launched in December. It's a very good month to launch books. Also that one, it made the #1 position in the Management Book Top 100 last December. And recently, again in December, we released it in English, so a couple of months ago. So I'm always starting with a little movie. So let's do that now as well. And you might recognize this. You might even have one of these. iPads, children, yeah. And you see, this doesn't work, you see? Doesn't do what she's expecting it to do. Yeah. And she's pretty persistent because she's trying again. And this one doesn't work either. And she's even giving it a third try. No. So this movie keeps on running for quite a bit, and at a certain point she gets so disappointed that she starts throwing these magazines around. And what this is about extreme expectations. So people's expectations are completely different now than they were 10, 15 years ago. And that starts when you're very little, but it's actually everywhere. It's with employers, it's with citizens, it's with clients, it's with patients. Every group has a completely different expectation from a service they are getting than they would have 10, 15 years ago. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I often get the question, what is big data? What is artificial intelligence? And when is it big data? And when is it artificial intelligence? And that's a very hard question to answer. And if you ask 10 different people, you get 10 different opinions, and they are not really consistent. So rather than trying to give you a definition, I thought it might help to give a common theme that they are all about. And that's related to these extreme expectations. Because what we're trying to do in the end, we're trying to understand behavior. And that can be behavior of a person, like here, or a group of persons, or a machine, or an organization, or a process. But if you can understand behavior, then you can probably better respond to these kind of expectations. So what do you need to do in order to understand behavior? Well, first of all, you need to measure, right? And you need to measure as much different things from a certain topic as you can. So if you start doing that, then you get into the corner of big data. And once you've measured all of that, then you need to try to understand what's going on. So you need to analyze the data. And when the analysis becomes more complex, you get into the corner of artificial intelligence. So it's sort of a triangle, yeah, with on the top the expectations, and then in the middle the behavior, and then the two supporting pillars are big data and artificial intelligence. That's the way that I see them all linked together. And that's the best I can do, I'm afraid, in terms of definitions, because if you try to make it more concrete than that, then you get into discussions, and one will think that it is big data and the other thinks it isn't, and I don't think that's a really relevant discussion to have. I think this is the common theme that we should all consider when we're having discussions around big data, artificial intelligence. So today I'm going to discuss a couple of things. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to live in a society that has big data, artificial intelligence in it, and how you can already see that today, how that changes our society and our understanding and our trust. And then I'm going to, that's mostly about risks and how you deal with it. And then the other part is actually the opportunity part. So how do you make use of all of this, and what kind of new developments are there? And then I'll end up with some examples. Let's try to make this interactive, because I already noticed that I have a very silent audience at the moment. So as Maarten says, yeah, I'm sort of making provocative statements sometimes. That's intentional, and most of what I say is not really true, or yeah, it is sort of a way to look at things, but you can also look at them in a different way. It's not a topic that is set in stone. It's a new topic. It's still developing. So yeah, my opinion is as good as yours. And actually the most value that we can get out of this is if we actually enter in discussions between different views on the topics that I will show. So let's start with what it is like to live in a smart society. Without us realizing it, we actually already live in a society where systems are determining our behavior, and the algorithms that are sitting inside these systems are determining our behavior. And that happens without you really realizing that it is happening. So for example, take these gates that you have at the subway stations. If you go back 10 years, then you could enter the subway without a ticket. And it was your decision. It was not allowed. There is a law that tells you that you're not allowed to enter the subway without a ticket, but it was still your decision if you would actually comply with that law or not. Now it's not, right? Now there are these gates. You can actually not pass these gates without a valid ticket. So, well, you can, but I can't. Yeah. So if there's now a system that basically took over the role of law here, right? And it's much more strict, because it's forcing you to do stuff. And besides just preventing you from entering the subway with a valid ticket, it's doing much more than that, because it's also deciding that I can only enter the station at specific spots. And it only also decides that I can no longer say goodbye to somebody near the subway. So it has all kinds of side effects that law actually doesn't have. So systems are already determining our behavior much more than law ever did. And this is a system that is actually forcing you to do things. But it's not just systems that force you to do things. Yeah, I'm getting at you. It's also systems that just give you advice. So this person is actually driving through wet concrete because his navigation system told him that that's a smart thing to do, right? And you're sort of slavishly following that advice, and we are laughing at it, and at the same time everybody thinks that could have been me, right? Yeah. Sorry, you had a question.
Well, you said I sometimes say things that may not be true, because you said the system replaces the law. To my knowledge, the law of having a ticket is still there, so I think it supports the law, it doesn't replace it, but it's a subtle difference.
No, I think it's a good remark. I mean, it would be good if it supports the law, but it actually does much more than that, because there is no law that says that I cannot say goodbye to somebody near the station, near the trains. But this device is preventing me from doing that. So it supports the law, plus a whole lot of different things that I don't want. So the law is still there, and the enforcement of this system, of that law, was much stricter than it was before, because before you could actually say, well, I don't have any money with me today, so let's not buy a ticket and I just risk getting a fine, but you could still make that decision. Now you have to be, I mean, an athlete like that guy to jump over the gates and actually be able to do that, right? And as I said, it's not just laws. I mean, in this case it's just advice, but it's also impacting our decision making. So there's actually, this is so pervasive that I would go as far as saying that at the moment we're not taking any decision anymore without somewhere being impacted by an algorithm. Either because you collect information on Google and then the Google search algorithm determines what you actually see, or because you're buying some shoes and then the price is actually set by a pricing algorithm, or all kinds of these algorithms are everywhere, and they're already making all kinds of decisions or impacting all kinds of decisions. And there's actually a term for that. They call it invisible barbed wire. It's a term coined by Evgeny Morozov, who's a famous philosopher. He said and wrote a lot about big data and artificial intelligence. Very little of it is positive, actually. And that's also why he's criticized by community, because yeah, the types of solutions that he's offering are not really realistic. Right? So if you ask him, you know, what do we need to do about the domination of the Googles and other firms, then his conclusion is that we should stop with the internet. So that kind of things. So that doesn't really work. But in this case, I think he has a very valid point. Right? We are really being guided continuously by this invisible barbed wire. Maybe the only thing that I'm not really agreeing with is the invisible part, because it is not yet invisible. That guy on the previous page, you can sort of imagine what happens in that car. He's like cursing at his navigation system because that sent him the wrong way. So that's the barbed wire that he's feeling and that he's getting annoyed about. And we all know that feeling. It's the feeling when you just booked your holiday, and then on every single web page that you see for the next 3 months, you see that same apartment that you just booked for half the price. So that's an algorithm, huh? And that algorithm is actually trying to impact your decision making in a way that you don't like. So that's the barbed wire. But give it 5 years, give it 10 years, we're talking 2030 now, and then the barbed wire is invisible. Then these algorithms are so good, and then we have access to so much data, that we will actually not show you that advertisement yet anymore. Because we know that you booked that apartment, so we will show you another advertisement. We're still impacting your decision making, you just don't notice it as anymore. So for me that means, and by the way, we're not that far from it. Maybe you've seen the discussions about PSD2 in the newspapers. PSD2 is the new Payment Service Directive, which means that banks are going to share data with other organizations, and Google actually put themselves in a position to be able to get access to that data through PSD2 in Europe over the next year or two. So once they have access to that data, they know that you bought that apartment or that you booked your holiday. So then they can already avoid showing you ads for stuff that you already bought. So it's getting there very quickly. But it means that we are in a unique time, actually. We are in the time where we are going to determine how, as a society, we have to control this stuff. How we are going to safeguard our autonomy in our decision making. So we are the generation that has to decide what kind of things do I want to decide myself, and when do I want to know that I'm impacted by algorithms, and when am I actually fine with a completely automated system and I don't even want to know that it's happening. If it starts to rain and my windshield wipers go on, I don't need to be involved in that decision. I'm perfectly happy with the algorithm detecting the rain and then deciding that they have to switch on. But when it's politics, maybe when it's partner choice, you probably want to have some impact on the decision making, right? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's be fair. If you're in online dating, a significant part of your decision making on partner choice is already taken over by an algorithm. So what are the issues? Yeah, sorry, question.
Partially also a game of getting to used to the system. I mean, when we were young, you couldn't buy alcohol below a certain age, so you get someone else to buy it for you. Mm-hmm. Right now, most of us have different email accounts so that to avoid this being spammed by particular things. You can also more and more get different identities on the web. Yeah. And it's not necessarily being boxed in. So I understand that it gets harder and more complex, but isn't that also that the younger generation will be more fluid in this than?
Yeah. I mean, definitely awareness is a thing. So if people become more aware of it, then they can make their own choices on how to deal with it. Yeah, I agree. The students that are continuously swapping Ahold bonus cards. So yeah, of course you can, but should you? I mean, don't we just want a system where we're happy to live in, rather than, well, this system we don't like, so let's try to find ways around it. I think as a society we have to decide what kind of system you want to be in. On the generational thing, what's interesting is that we start to realize that first we thought that the new generation makes different decisions than the old generation. But it turns out that it's not really a generation thing, but more an age thing. So you make different decisions on your 15th than you make on your 22nd, right? Because in your 22nd, you're actually applying for that job, and then you might not find the pictures that you put on Facebook at your 15th so cool anymore. So yeah, there is definitely some generational effect, but there is also a far bigger age effect that you just make different decisions when you're younger because other things are important to you. So yeah, what I did was, this is not science. I wanted to know what can go wrong with algorithms. So what I did was, for a couple of months I actually started to collect headlines about data analysis and everything around it. And it's not hard because there's something in the news every day. And then just make piles of them and see if you can sort of classify them. And turns out that you can classify them in these 5 categories pretty accurately. And some of them, they're really well known. So like cybersecurity issues, we already deal with that for years. IT architecture and data governance are also quite well known and well understood, although things are changing, and I will come back to that later when I talk about the opportunities. But 2 of them are actually quite new. So the first one is about reliability, and the other one is around ethics. It's not that reliability and ethics are new, but the way that we deal with it in the face of data and algorithms is interesting. So let's look at reliability first. So here you see a picture actually of the first deadly accident with an autonomously driving car. This is the Uber car that killed a person on a bike, a lady on a bike in the United States. I think it's about half a year ago. couple of very interesting things happened right after that accident. The first thing that happened, within 24 hours, the police said, if there was a human driver in this car, that person would also be dead. And what they do there is they give their opinion about what they think the quality of an algorithm should be, because they are comparing it to the quality of a human driver. Now, there are a couple of questions about that. First of all, do we really want the police to give their opinion on that? Are they the right party to make these statements? Maybe they are, maybe they are not. The second, do you really want them to make that within 24 hours? Because it doesn't sound like they really gave it a lot of thought when they made that statement. And third, of course, is that actually the right level of expectation? Or do we want an algorithm to be 2 times as good as a human, or 10 times as good, or 1,000,000 times, or flawless, right? And how realistic is it then to expect that it actually is? Yeah, my observation is at least that we have completely different expectations from computers than from humans. So if there are 40,000 people killed in the United States by humans every year in traffic accidents, none of it made the front page, none of it made the news, right? One person killed by an algorithm, and it makes the front page and the news in almost every country in the world. So clearly our expectations from algorithms are different than from human beings, and maybe they should be. So that was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was that they started investigating because they had the data stored and all the images stored and everything, so they could investigate actually what happened. Now, mind you, that's possible for an algorithm, but that's not possible for a human, right? You can ask a person what happened, but you have no way to actually make sure that he's telling the truth. And here you have all the images and all the data, so you can inspect it. And you can have a discussion about explainability of an algorithm, so how good is that explainability? But for a human, you just have to trust that whatever that person tells is the truth, and you have very little ways to actually dive into that black box, which we call our brains. So when they started investigating that algorithm, they found out that the algorithm actually saw that woman. And the algorithm saw that woman in time to stop. But what an algorithm does is it has to make decisions about stuff moving in front of a car. And that can be a group of mosquitoes, right? Or a plastic bag. And if it keeps on stopping for plastic bags and mosquitoes, then you also have a very dangerous situation. So that's not what you want. So that would be a false positive. And this is a false negative. It should have stopped, but it didn't. So you can tune the algorithm. You can tune it to have more false positives or more false negatives. And if you have more false positives, you have less false negatives, and vice versa. So the question is, was this algorithm properly tuned? And then the question is, who is actually going to decide if the algorithm was properly tuned? So if I use my imagination about what might happen around these kind of cases, they will go to court. And then they go to a judge, and then the judge has to decide, first of all, if that algorithm was actually good enough to be there in the first place, and second of all, if it was tuned to have the right amount of false positives versus false negatives. Now, I'm not convinced that judges at the moment have the proper education to make these decisions. I can imagine that they load that off to an expert, but I'm even not convinced that they have enough knowledge and understanding currently to actually make sense of what the expert says. So, yeah, I really wonder how this is going to pan out in the next decade. I think there are going to be a lot of cases, and this is all going to be case law. And then in some exceptions, we probably think, well, that's clearly wrong, and then politics will jump in, and there will be some adjustments to our laws to actually make sure that these exceptions cannot happen. So that's probably the trajectory that we're going to see over the next decade or so, and that's going to determine these boundaries that I was just talking about.
But I think there will be more happening within those 10 years because the pedestrians will change their behavior accordingly, because now they understand that there's no one in this car.
Yeah.
And they might behave differently if there's no one in the car.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah,
I think
so
there's more of an
society changes as well.
Yeah, it changes
very
with
clearly. Look at the
Yeah.
little girl with the iPad. I mean,
Yeah.
a little girl wouldn't have done that 10 years ago, right?
Well, girls would.
On a magazine or on an yeah.
Yeah, you're saying that the algorithm tuning is actually that the expert can explain and the judge doesn't understand, but I even doubt if the experts can explain these self-learning algorithms. So it's not only a problem of the judges, it's a problem of learning algorithms.
I agree. Sorry.
And it's probably neither a problem of algorithms only. I think judges have that dilemma much more often. That they have to rely
Yeah,
on
so the
experts.
comment is that the judges actually have the dilemma far more often, not just with algorithms. Yeah, I agree on that as well. Yeah. So and to come back to the question about you're blaming the algorithm. So who is responsible here, right? If there was a driver, it was clear. It was either the driver or the lady itself. But now it becomes opaque because it might still be. In this case, by the way, the algorithm was supervised by a human, and the human was watching America Got Talent while she was supervising the algorithm. So in this case, that decision is not that hard yet. But of course, there are going to be other cases, right? And cases where there is no supervision by a human, and yeah, then who is responsible? Is it the person that programs or trains the algorithm, or is it the person that put it in the car, or is it me because I bought the car? Or it's very also that is probably going to be mostly court decisions that are going to guide us through where the responsibility is in this.
The pedestrian disguised as a plastic bag.
Yeah. Yeah, so actually there are quite a few errors in algorithms that humans wouldn't make, right? So, yeah, you probably know of the demonstrations where you put a poster next to the highway and suddenly the AI thinks that there is a traffic light because it doesn't recognize, yeah, the poster with maybe something that doesn't even look like a traffic light triggers the algorithm to think that there is a traffic light, right? So these kind of things are happening actually. So it's a form of cybersecurity that we are currently not considering, but we should if this becomes massive. Yeah. So this is the reliability part, and there's much more to say about it, of course. But let's dive a little bit into the ethics part, because also ethics is changing. And I used to have here the example again of the self-driving car, and then you have to decide if the person inside the car dies or the person in front of the car, and then the algorithm has to make that decision, and who does he pick, that kind of things. But these are becoming a bit boring, I would say, because I see them everywhere now. So I came actually up with an example that from my own experience, and that might also be more relevant for the audience here. I was talking to the head of psychiatry of one of our UMCs, and I asked her about, aren't you worried, aren't you concerned about you getting advice from computers, and actually the underlying mechanisms you don't really understand anymore, so you just have to trust the computer. He said, well, that's for me that's not really a big issue, because currently I'm also basing some of my decisions on research that my colleagues have done. And I'm not going to redo all that research, so in a sense I just have to trust them that they did it right. So what's the difference between me trusting a computer and me trusting the research of a colleague? Is there really no, for her, according to her, there was not a really big difference. She said the main impact that this has is I now have a computer that tells me, sometimes with 80% accuracy, that person in front of me is going to get violent tomorrow. So what do I do with that information? I can tell that patient, and then I can hope that he takes medicine to prevent that. But what if he doesn't? So violent patients in a hospital are actually causing serious issues with nurses then getting out of, how do you say that, taking sick leave basically because of the experience, right? But you cannot tell the nurse about the 80% score because it's privacy sensitive stuff. So you cannot just share that with everyone. But the nurse knows that you know. So you get into all kinds of ethical dilemmas because now you know stuff that you didn't know before. And be aware it's not 100% sure, right? So I said 80% in this case. Yeah, maybe the patient is right not taking his medicine because he knows himself better than the algorithm or not. So yeah, because you're using algorithms, ethics is actually, and the type of ethical decisions that you have to take are changing. And I expect that that's going to happen in more and more fields, but medicine is of course one of the first ones, or healthcare is one of the first ones where that becomes obvious. How much time do I have?
Well, I was looking at the clock. Maybe you can gradually, because we want to have a discussion.
Yeah. So, but I want to tell something positive as well. So let's talk a little bit about opportunities, right? And what you see is that when you try to use data, when you try to use analytics, we used to think about that as a single organization holding the data, holding the clients, holding the analytics, and they had to sort of solve that problem for them. And it was actually already quite a tough problem to solve. But it's no longer the world today. Today the data is coming from everywhere. The algorithms are coming from everywhere. Your computers are probably somewhere in the cloud delivered by yet another party. And you sort of have to bring that all together. So instead of a single organization trying to achieve something, it's an ecosystem of all kinds of organizations and other parties that try to achieve something with data and analytics. And there are very different ways to organize that. And if you look at the successful organizations of, let's say, the last 2 decades, so the Googles and the Apples and the Amazons and the Facebooks, etc., they're all one incarnation of an ecosystem that, if I would use an analogy with a traffic situation, it's a bit like a crossing with traffic lights. So there's this one giant party in the middle, and that party is actually controlling the traffic lights. And everybody else in that ecosystem is just using the crossing. But all the decision power is with that single party in the middle. They set the standards. They decide who drives, who stops. There are good things about such an ecosystem, and there are bad things about such an ecosystem. The completely opposite way of organizing an ecosystem would be the analogy of what in traffic would be a roundabout. So it's a completely decentralized system, where the decisions are made by the people on the roundabout. So in this case, by all the organizations in the ecosystem make their own decisions. For both ecosystems, there are a couple of things that you always have to take care of. So you always have to take care of standards. If you have no agreements, then such an ecosystem doesn't work. And you see that with both cases, right? So here is the standard, red is stop, green is drive. And here the standard is right goes first. But they both have standards. The second thing that you have to take care of is access. So who is actually allowed to access that ecosystem and what are they allowed to do? And in case of traffic, car traffic, it's if you have a driver's license, you're allowed on, and if you don't, then you're not allowed on. And the third thing is that you have to take care of conflict resolution, and that's actually one that's quite often forgotten when ecosystems are set up first. Because you don't set up an ecosystem with the idea that you're going to have a conflict. But actually, that's like a hidden problem that you might have, because if there is no way to resolve conflicts in an ecosystem, the first time that it actually occurs, it can actually destroy your ecosystem. So it's something that you have to think about from the start. And of course also conflict resolution is taken care of, right? If there is an accident, we actually know who caused it and what the consequences are. So examples of roundabout ecosystems, there are not that many, but the internet itself would be a roundabout ecosystem. There's no single party that controls the internet. And if you remove any party, then it can easily be replaced by another one. On the left-hand side, that's not the case. Huh? So if you pull out Facebook, then that ecosystem no longer exists. So let's take a couple of lenses, views on these different ecosystems. So first, the investment perspective. So who knows diaspora? Is there anybody? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's 4. That's 4 more than usual. So diaspora is actually a full competitor of Facebook. It has the complete same functionality that Facebook has. But it's set up as a roundabout ecosystem. So it's an open source project. There are various research institutes contributing to it and volunteers. And the data is in what you call pods. So everybody sits on their own data. Again, the way the interface works is exactly the same as Facebook, so you wouldn't see the difference. But you actually sit on your own data. Now, from an investment perspective, that's a terrible choice. Because where do I go as an investor with my money? There's no party that can actually build a business model on this. So from an investment perspective, I want to have a crossing with traffic lights, and I want to put my money in the party that controls the traffic lights, because that's where all the revenue will eventually go, or a large fraction of the revenue will eventually go. You can also see that actually from the 2 examples. So I mentioned the internet, the other one is the World Wide Web, which is sort of running on top of the internet, but you could also consider as a roundabout ecosystem. These 2 examples, they were not built with investment money. So the internet was built as a project of the American defense, DARPA, defense, how do you say that? Defense organization. And World Wide Web was developed at CERN. And these 2 ecosystems, they only became interesting for investors when they were already so big that these individual parties that are using that ecosystem became financially interesting for investments. But to start it, there was no investment money, and I doubt that you would actually be able, when the World Wide Web was not there, to go to somebody and say, we have this brilliant idea of a decentralized ecosystem, are you willing to give me money to build it? You need the research organization that has the problem of sharing data to build something like that. And then there's going to be an investor who thinks, I'm going to use that for something else, and I can make a lot of money if I use it for something else. But from the start, from the ground up, you're not getting these ecosystems funded. We actually also see that in practice when we are trying to set up funding for these kind of ecosystems. So yeah, if you would only take this lens, you would say always build a crossing with traffic lights, right? But it's not the only perspective. The second one is scalability. And scalability you have to sort of put in perspective here, because of course Google and Facebook are huge companies, right? But they're not the size of the internet or the World Wide Web. And an interesting example here is look at electric vehicles. So Tesla is of course, they started as this crossing with traffic lights. They thought we are going to do electric vehicles, and they built it and they built up standards. And then a couple of years back, something interesting happened. Elon Musk wrote a famous blog post before he got into trouble with the SEC and was smoking pot and everything. And in that blog post, he said, I'm going to share my patents with other parties under certain conditions, but I'm going to share my patents with other parties, even with my competitors. Now, if I try to take a classical business view on that, that's a very difficult decision to understand. Or it's a decision that is difficult to understand, I should say. Because why would you share your patents if you just invested a couple of billion to actually build them up and to diversify yourself? If I take the roundabout view, then suddenly it makes perfect sense. Because what you realize is that you cannot actually build an electric vehicle ecosystem with just one party in it. It's just too big, too large scale, right? So the only way to make that ecosystem successful is if you're able to draw other parties to your ecosystem and that they will take responsibility so that you can build it together.
So should universities give away their patents?
That depends what kind of ecosystem you're trying to build. If you actually have something that you think should scale beyond the university and you cannot do it by yourself, then you should think about sharing knowledge, because that's what's of course happening here. If you start sharing knowledge, you will pull people in your ecosystem. So yeah, if you think that you have something that diversifies you from other universities and will pull students in because you're diversified, then you should keep it for yourself. But then you're aiming for a crossing with traffic lights, right? And then the university is the controlling the traffic lights.
But it's only from an economical perspective. I'm not sure my English is good enough to explain in English, but to keep the data to yourself, if it gives you a unique perspective, is only from an economical point of view. You also could maybe have another reason to share the knowledge.
Of course, yeah. So but usually economics plays a role in this, right? Especially around patents. So from scalability perspective, if it really has to become huge, then making it more roundabout-like might be an interesting choice. And what you also see here is that something can start as one type of ecosystem and that you can actually try to change it into something else. And the last one that I want to lift out here is the trust perspective, right? Because the best example here is the fake news example. So I don't know if anybody of you saw the Zuckerberg performance. 2 minutes, okay. So 1 minute for this and then 1 minute for all the rest. The Zuckerberg performance for American Congress. But they asked him about trust in Facebook, and his answer was very interesting because he said, "Well, I'm going to hire 20,000 extra people, and I just bought a company for $500 million that is going to automate all of this, and then trust will come back." And that's an interesting answer because I don't think that it has anything to do with losing trust. It won't bring my trust back. The reason why I won't trust it is because I don't trust Facebook. I don't trust Zuckerberg to decide for me what's real and what's fake. So the only way that I can actually bring back trust is by decentralizing it. And Google did an experiment with that, which was quite successful in the United States. They call it the fact checker. So instead of investing themselves, what they did was they made it open. They created an API. So an interface where other parties could actually interface with, and they could start flagging if something was true or false. And you get all kinds of parties that start doing that. The classical ones, the Reuters and the Bloombergs, but also this party PolitiFact, which looks a little bit like Wikipedia. So they start flagging the news. And there's a way for me to give feedback. So in the end you can see a ranking of all kinds of parties that start flagging the news with what people think about them. And I can choose myself which of these parties I want to check my news. And that started to bring trust back. So here you also see that if you start putting that responsibility in multiple parties, that can help to bring trust back. So that's also something where roundabout ecosystems are better than crossings. And here you see that, of course, Google makes a very little roundabout in their huge crossing, you could say, because the rest of Google is, of course, still centrally controlled, etc. So I have 1 minute left for everything else that I wanted to tell you, but it still is quite important because I think that we need to find a way where we disconnect what I would call informed trust from blind trust. I don't think that the whole world is interested in explanations about algorithms. So the transparency vision, that if you become transparent then people will start trusting you, I don't think it exists. If I look at how people trust, it's usually based on reputation, it's based on experience, it's based on brand. So we need to find ways where parties that can actually understand these algorithms and have an opinion about them, then connect it to their reputation, to their brand, and to the experience that other people have with that brand, to make sure that people start trusting that brand. It's a bit like if you buy a pack of milk in the supermarket. If you look at the expiry date, you trust it because you buy it at Albert Heijn, and you assume that they have put only packs of milk where that stamp has been verified appropriately. It's not that you have looked up yourself how that expiry date was calculated. That's not how trust works. Actually, we already have that role for financial reporting. It's called the auditor. So that's my other head, the KPMG head. They look into detail into annual reports, they put a stamp on it, and then the rest of the world has to trust the stamp. And in the last 10 years you can also see that that can go horribly wrong. Because if the experiences are that they are not doing that well, then you have negative experiences, reputation is gone, brand is gone. KPMG came very close to bankruptcy because of exactly this, right? If you don't do this well as auditor, then you have no right to exist, basically.
Yeah, but it's also because you don't know what the stamp exactly entails. You have a certain expectation about what the stamp means.
Exactly. Explainability is not just about the algorithm, it's also expectation management for the general public. It's a very important one, actually. It's one that worries me most. Because in some cases, KPMG made mistakes by assigning these annual reports. That's actually very easy if that's the problem. You just fire the guy that put the signature, or you train them better or something like that. But in other cases, we did nothing wrong. We were completely right in signing that annual report. Still, the company went bankrupt 3 months later, but that was not because we signed it off wrong. It's because people think that when we sign it off, the company can not go bankrupt. But that's actually not what that statement means. So it's about explaining. And this is a business transaction. These are business people involved. Annual reports are only read by investors, etc. Now I'm going to sign off on this algorithm in the self-driving car, right? And I have the same problem because I cannot guarantee that that algorithm always works. So I will say something like, we have not been able to demonstrate that it doesn't work. And then tomorrow that car will actually kill somebody. And then there's an emotional part in it which is much stronger than in case of the annual report. So this is actually the part that we are struggling with most. What are we able to sign off and what aren't we able to sign off?
Limitations are of the signing off. It's about understanding limitations.
Yeah, but then they must be willing to listen, right? Because we told them 100 times what it means when we sign off. Still the expectations are different. Yeah. So I think that this is an opportunity and a threat. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So but to make one final remark, if you as an organization have a lot of algorithms that you base your decision making on, then I think you have to look into what are the really impactful ones and how are you actually going to assure that they are working correctly. And how are people going to trust that you did the right things for that? And I don't think that the solution is to try to explain to each individual how it works. I think this is the way forward, but there are still quite some gaps, and the one that we just discussed is, I think, one of the biggest ones that we still have to solve. By the way, there is a program called VW Data that is doing research on this, and Twente is in it. So yeah, you're contributing to this discussion as well. Thank you very much. Yeah.
And I'd like to ask 3 other people over here to take a stand over here. No, you can't sit, you have to stand, Willem. And Sander will join them as well. So basically we prepared a number of statements. I'm going to mix the statements, but let me first introduce to you, in the middle actually, Wim Kamerman, who's a student of business IT and also member of the advisory team on Shaping 2030. We have Jos van Hillegersberg, who's professor of business information systems at UT and deep into data-driven decision support systems. And we have Willem Jonker, who is CEO of EIT Digital, one of the 8 branches of the European Institute of Technology, and very deep into digitalization, I should say. He's also a professor of database technology, but I should say more into security, actually. Okay, like I said, we actually first prepared 3 statements, and I'm gonna just start with one because I suspect we'll need most of the time for that statement, and considering these people. And it's interesting, this discussion is also about telling our management what they should do by 2030. So, you know, these are inspirational sessions, but the end is that we actually formulate a strategy for the next coming years on where we want to go to. So this is also a chance to voice your opinion on where we should go to with this university. Tom is still smiling here, okay? But I know this smile, and I think he agrees with me, okay? Okay, so we'll see if I'm still here next week. Anyway, I want to start with this statement. In 2030, managerial decision making should be heavily, if not entirely, dominated by algorithms. And I wanted you guys to take the floor on this. And I'm looking at Wim. You already have an opinion on this, I think. Go for it. Well, no, I'll call you Willem. Okay. I'll call you Wim. Okay.
Good. The question specifically states should.
Yep.
But I think it's will. I think managerial decisions will be supported by algorithms. And I specifically say supported, not dominated. It's like the example that was just stated about the psychiatric patients. Mm-hmm. The doctors trust an algorithm in a certain decision. An algorithm can basically advise in that sense, but I don't believe that in this case we should just trust the decision and then take a managerial decision there.
Okay.
I think it's simply managers will be supported, and even more so than right now.
Yeah, but you know, one of the reasons why we deliberately avoided will, because we know, well, the answer is yes. You know, I think Sander already convinced us, you know, even without knowing it, it's already happening. Okay. And the word dominated in there is for a good reason. So it's should be dominated. Got an opinion about that? You can think about this. Willem definitely has an opinion about this.
Yeah, I think especially my people have an opinion about this, and they would probably fully agree, and I fully disagree.
Good. So, okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Why do I fully disagree? Well, first of all, I never make sensible decisions, and all these algorithms do some kind of logic on data, and I don't think that managerial decision making is like that at all. If you have a very good manager that was running GE for a time, he wrote a book, and it is titled Straight from the Guts. And I think what's very important, what managerial decision making is about, is getting a lot of data, a lot of conflicting data, and then try to make a decision that matches your intuition. And I don't think that by 2030 any AI-based system will be able to really mimic intuition. So that's why I don't think that this will happen.
Jos?
Yes. I think I agree with Martin. It's already happening, but I think management decisions, managers make many types of decisions. And what has been happening over the past decades is that you already see what we used to call strategic decision Think of financial sector, whether somebody should get a mortgage or not. It used to be sort of an important management decision. Today we find it very normal. It's an algorithm that assesses the credit risk and then gives you a loan or not. So it's shifting. And I think what is interesting in algorithmic decision making is that the algorithms get more powerful, and we find a lot of, for example, in financial sector, a lot of decisions are automatically made by algorithms. So it's shifting, and it's I think all about the teamwork between the algorithm and the manager, so that the more interesting decisions, the more complicated one can be the team between algorithms and managers. The more simple ones you can be, and what is simple is shifting, as I said, can be done by algorithms, and that gives, in the end, overall better decision making. But I think it's very dangerous, and you see this also in financial sector, if you completely leave it up to algorithms, both big and small decisions. You see in the financial crisis what happened when you do that. So I think it's a lot about teamwork and making the right balance of decision making between algorithms and people.
No, we still have 10 years to go, but I'm also very interested in your opinion about this, Sander.
I'm really wondering how much of the decision making of the university at the moment is really based on intuition. I'm worried if that's really if that's a lot, right? Most of the decisions will hopefully be made based on some sort of reliable information, let's put it like that. So intuition is a part of that, but the question is how big that part actually is. I would translate the question or the statement into, should there be a human in the loop in the decision making? And what does that do with the human? So, and that's also, of course, what I mentioned in healthcare. So this was an 80% case, but there are cases now where machines are already 99% accurate in, for example, determining breast cancer from a picture, and we know that the doctors are only 93 or 94% accurate on it. So can you then still expect that doctor to go against the system when he knows that the system... And at the moment we're still in a phase where artificial intelligence is sort of alien intelligence. So the type of errors they make, they are completely different from the human errors, right? So even though it's 99% accurate, that 1%, if you put that where they are mistaken, if you put that to a human, 9 out of 10 of these mistakes a human wouldn't make. So then the combination is still valuable. So as long as we are in that situation, I think a human in the loop is valuable. But we probably somewhere in the next 12 years surpass, not for everything, but for certain domains, that phase. And actually that human has only a negative contribution. So every time that human would go against the decision of the algorithm, it would be wrong. Right. So in those cases, I don't think that it makes sense to put a human in the loop. And I even think that you shouldn't put a human in that position because you're expecting a responsibility from that person that he actually cannot take.
So one of the concerns that I often have is that if we don't do anything, it will happen. Which means that at a certain day you'll wake up and think to yourself, what have I missed? But by then it's too late. So maybe the question is not so interesting on whether it should happen or should it happen. The question is really, how do we get to a point, let's say 10 years down the road, such that we think it's acceptable for us? So that's very long, actually, along any of the things that you guys just said. So let's assume it's going to happen one way or the other. How can we, and now we're talking about strategic decisions, how can we in the next years get to a system at this university that we still have the feeling, yes, we're happy with the way that we, on different levels, actually make decisions? Any opinions about this? Willem?
Yeah, before going to the specific situation of the university, I would like to a little bit broaden the discussion indeed, because these of course statements are yes or no, black and white, and that also to fuel a little bit the energy. But if you look at it, it's interaction. It's interaction between technological developments, and technological developments are not really new. I mean, they've always been there. And I like the barriers. At the same time, if you go back to 1,000 years, people would say, hey, when I go from A to B, I just walk over the soil, and now they put a road, I have to buy a car, and I have to drive there. So I'm enforced. You see, so and that's not new. So that's happening all the time. So there is an interaction between technological development that shapes the world. There is a society that absorbs and adapts, what was said as well. And that, of course, is a regulatory body that says what are the rules that we are playing with. And that is defined, again, by society, because politics makes the laws, and then you... so that's the triangle in which we are playing all the time. And I don't think that this triangle that we are seeing today is any different from the ones that were before. Maybe things go faster, maybe it's different kind of things that you see emerge. So should you be afraid that humans go out of the loop? No. In certain areas, yes. Did that happen in the past? Yes. So don't be too nervous about it. And I think if you look at that, then the debate becomes less emotional, because the debate, in my view, is far too emotional. It's about, will robots take my job? Will I not have decision power anymore? That's what we, as a society, will commonly decide to what extent we let it go. And I think that is an answer to your question, and that is for society as a whole, but it's also for the university. Yeah? So if a society as a whole, and I very much believe in the knowledge of the crowd, and the knowledge of the crowd, of course, has to be channeled to become useful, and that's channeled in a parliamentary system or in a university regulation system and whatever. So I wouldn't put it too much like worries or whatever. I think what we have to achieve is a more factual view. Okay, this is a technology development, it's new. All things that are new are some scary elements, but there are also some comforting elements. And if you look back in time, all these technological developments have at least made it, maybe I have more choice, I have even more choice. I have more technology, more restrictions, and more choice. Yep. Because the choice when I had when there was nothing, my choice was sitting there and making sure I get my own food. And now I can even choose a different restaurant. So I think there is an advance overall. And I don't know who read the book Factfulness. We should have that approach to this problem as well. So that's much more based on, okay, what is now factually working, and then a lot of scary things are disproven by the factual evolution over time. So I have a lot of confidence. For example, democracies, the number of democracies that have emerged in the last 200 years.
Let's hear the audience. I can't imagine that no one has an opinion on this.
I agree with part of, no, I can be loud enough, I think.
You need to be recorded.
Okay, so...
This is forever. This is the scary part.
Lovely. I would say that first of all, we don't have a board for the type of decisions that you can optimize with an algorithm, right? The kind of thing you can optimize with an algorithm is fine, but it predetermines a number of things that you have decided where you want to go. You have a board to make the decisions on where it actually is that you want to go. And that's not a thing you can do in an algorithm, because it's not an optimization problem, it's a choice. And choices are made between, of course you want information, you could then sketch all the scenarios of where you want to go and you could optimize it, but in the end it's a choice. And a choice you make, if you say you make this on the basis of a gut instinct, then I would say this is just your own feedback algorithm that you're trusting. And actually I think algorithms are quite a bit better at this than people. So in medical imaging indeed, doctors will say, I call this a cancer based on my gut feeling, but it's not their gut feeling, it's just their experience working their way into whatever image they're seeing. So, yes, we'll still have a board, and I don't think they should be doing the type of things that algorithms can do. They should leave that to the algorithms.
Nelly.
Yeah, so I feel that actually, this new ideas about what is the goal of economics. We are used to think, okay, economics is to maximize the profit, but maybe the goal of economics is to give everybody sufficient living within environmental restrictions. So the same, what is the goal of management? And it's not necessarily taking quantitative decisions which are taken better by computer, but I believe myself that management is about empowering people. And I do not see algorithms doing that very well so far. And even one person cannot do it. You need really a team of different persons of different qualities to do that. So if our management can focus on that, instead of, I don't know, technical sides of their job, that would be only great.
Okay, let's move on to another one. How many teachers are here in the room? That can't be the case. Okay, anyway, there are enough teachers in the room to go to the next statement. Well, we thought about the formulation, but you're supposed to butt in. You didn't. You have to raise your hand. But I'll
because well, maybe a personal comment, because my opinion on leading a university is there's a difference between leading and managing. There's a difference in being logical intelligent or emotional intelligent, and there's a difference between being wise and smart. And I think these algorithms can use us being good managers, being smart and being logical intelligent, but cannot help us being emotional intelligent, wise and leading. So I think we should focus on those leading, being wise and this emotional intelligence.
I apologize and thank you. This was the original statement, and I'll first phrase that one. In 2030, all forms of assessment should happen digitally and without human interference. Think a bit about this. Should be completely autonomous. And this thing concentrates on forms of assessment. You could also say all forms of teaching. Okay, so that's the provocative part. But before giving the floor to the teachers, I'd like to give the floor to the panelists. Jos, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I largely agree with this proposition. I think the assessments we are having and the steps towards digital assessments are still very traditional. So we are bringing paper-based exams now to notebooks where you can do multiple choice exams on a notebook, and we call it digital assessment. But it's actually not that interesting if you look at what you can do today, for example, with playing serious games. In some modules, we already do this, where we just let students in teams play games in an artificial world, make decisions, see how the team performs in a game, and the game gives you back so much data on what the students are learning, how they are progressing through the course, how they are communicating, and you can do analytics on top of that. And it's actually much more interesting what you get from that assessment environment than in the end organizing the multiple choice, what has been the same for decades, and you can digitize it. But you should not forget to look at these kind of assessments, which are, I hope, hopefully in 2030 the standard.
Okay. I'm looking at Sander. So maybe we can go back to your statement, you know, not the statement, the question, what about the human in the loop? Yeah. Now the human is a teacher.
Yeah.
So where is the teacher in the loop in this?
So the interesting part from this question is, why would you want to do this? And why would you want to have this all digital? And I can think of a number of reasons. Maybe you want to reduce the workload or the number of teachers. Sorry. But maybe you want to have a more fair assessment. Are you afraid of biases in teacher assessments? Especially if you look at biases, I think we're entering a very interesting discussion. So the question is if we are currently actually involved in a selection algorithm for recruitment. So it's slightly different, but I think a lot of the thinking about it can be quite similar. And what you see there is that it's actually quite difficult to demonstrate that algorithm doesn't have any bias. And it starts with the definition of success. So you select the best candidate. What's the best candidate? If you don't have a proper definition of that, then it becomes very hard to implement an algorithm that actually assesses that correctly. Now recruiters do that, and then if you ask them why they selected the candidate, depending on when and why you're asking them, you're getting an answer that makes sense. So if I would ask that to our recruiters in an informal setting, sometimes I get the answer I already knew within 2 seconds that candidate was not going to work. So that's not an analytical decision that then resulted in that conclusion. That's the emotional
that's the
intelligence.
gut feeling,
that's the gut feeling, maybe. I think it's going to be very hard to translate that into some algorithmic logic.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I'm pretty sure that the algorithm that we use for this recruitment selection, in the end, we are actually able to make more unbiased than the recruiter decisions themselves. So we talked to our client about this, and I said, please don't demonstrate that, because then we have two problems. Because actually, bias, gender bias or racial bias is not allowed at all. It has to be zero. If you demonstrate that our recruiters actually have bias, then you just invalidated our existing process, because apparently then we are violating law. And you still didn't solve the algorithm problem, because you demonstrated that it's better than humans, but it still has bias, so that we cannot allow either. So you actually making the problem worse rather than reducing it.
Yeah.
So considering all of this, I doubt very much if you should wish for algorithms, only algorithms deciding on the performance of students.
Okay, I'll come back to your algorithm bias actually
Yeah.
in this statement, because I had something else in mind. Willem.
Yeah, just to piggyback on this, indeed, I think the focus from now till 2030, when it's about assessment, it's for me the focus should be more on what do you want to assess and how do you define that, rather than what are now the tools that you are using to implement that assessment, and that can be support. And what I would like to see is I still feel that the assessment when it comes to the teaching is too much knowledge oriented, and I would like to add at least the skill part much more, but also the behavior part, because what you see is that if you want to be successful in any working environment where you have to collaborate with people and so on, of course the knowledge needs to be there, or you have to, and that is of course where digital technology helps, access to knowledge is almost instant. Yeah, because you say, well, in 2019 this happened, and then somebody says, no, it was in 2017, because he Googled at the web while you were there. So knowledge is almost instantly available. Skills, of course, are more diffuse, and we are less far in supporting them with tools. But for example, gaming is part of it, that skill. It's also part behavior. Can you work as a team, and so on. So I think those skills should be more into the evaluation. And that, for me, is a more important discussion than, okay, what are the tools that you are using? So if you are having any discussion about evaluation and so on, I would like to move from, okay, does a university only bring people with great knowledge, or do they have more responsibility in bringing them with skills and also all kind of collaboration abilities, how they can work with others?
Yeah,
so one of the reasons,
the biggest challenge in that I think is to objectively define what you mean by successfully working in a team.
Yeah, because and of course there factual checking is much easier. Yeah, because you know whether you know the facts, and then you can give a mark, and this mark you can even harmonize over the Netherlands. So 8 at the University of Amsterdam. Okay, still a little bit less than in Twente, but nevertheless also good.
So one of the reasons we put forward this statement is actually that you could actually go to a situation where the role of the teacher becomes very different. Maybe it's without knowing explicitly what that role could be. It could be a role of more emphasis on skill development, very different type of competences than just knowledge transfer. The interesting thing is that if from a strategic point of view we would try to push for these things, it also demands a lot from the teachers, because they would have to change their way of teaching, and dramatically, perhaps. So maybe I can hear one of the teachers from this audience to get an opinion on this. Or somebody very close to teaching, that's also good.
Give the word to the student in the panel, because I think he's...
Fine. Go ahead.
Indeed. In this case, I couldn't agree more with you, actually, Willem. I think that in 2030, or even it can be starting from now, students should be going to this university for personal development, and that it's not about at the end of the 3 years you get a certain paper, and that basically proves that you, for example, indeed know a lot of knowledge. That is really more about, you came in with this skill set, you came in with these set of talents, and this is how you developed yourselves over the years. then adding in the role of the teacher is really about how do you develop a student? How do you develop certain skills of the student? But then when it comes to assessment, it's really tricky. Because how are you gonna, well, quantify talents? How can you do that? If we talk about degrees, I don't think there will be degrees in 2030. But what will it be? It will be more of a talent thing. We have proved that you are specifically good at this talent. Yeah, but how do you prove it? It's not tangible. It's partially emotional. Someone can emotionally judge that someone is good with people, for example. But how do you quantify this? How can you say, yeah, you're better than, I don't know, someone else, because of what reason? So I think that's the most tricky part that we should focus on.
May I say something to that? Because what I've done in many organizations, and current one as well, you always have a calibration of performance appraisals. And that's very difficult because you have to come with numbers and whatever. So what I always start with the calibration team is a blind test. So we have 20 people, and I ask the calibration team, which is 4 people, do your ranking. Just your ranking. Don't use any facts, do your ranking. And then I put those rankings together. You will be surprised how much these rankings coincide. So apparently, we all know who is good, and we find it very difficult to capture. And again, as I said it before, I believe the wisdom of the crowd. So that are kind of elements you could bring in. So it's not what you now have, an individual teacher gives an individual subject and so on. Why not a pool? And then make a judgment based on those things. You know, so it's not hobby horsing, because individual opinions are cancelled out. And you can do that in a team. And then you don't need these hard metrics to come to a fair judgment, because that's why you want metrics. You want to have certain fairness into the system. Could be a way out. Anyway.
I really want to hear his response to that answer, because how do you feel about it as a student if we tell you there are no metrics, or at least no explicit metrics, but the 20 teachers that looked at it all agree that you suck?
Yeah. Yeah. If they agree you are a star, he will say yes, but if he sucks.
Yeah. I think it depends on who is judging. A set of teachers can assess one part, but for example, peer students can assess another part. But then still, indeed, what do you judge it on? And that's
do you believe in fairness of such a system?
Yeah, it's the trust in the judgment.
Do you trust the system? Yeah.
I need to watch the clock. I have the obligation to watch the clock. That means we need to gradually wrap up, because I know also lots of people are counting that we kind of finish around 11:30. Let me first get a hand for these 4 people, and notably against on this one. And Jos is going to take over from here.
I think we only have 2 votes still to reset.
I thought Jos was going to take over.
No, I'm not going to take over. It's not so easy to reset. Reset. Okay, just try to vote again.
Okay, let's try to vote again. This is interesting.
Ja, je mag maar 1 keer stemmen.
It's interesting. Almost no change. So. little bit more no.
We hadden
So please.
deze ochtend gewoon kunnen skippen.
Ja, iedereen gaat rustig dit weekend in.
Ontwikkelingsgericht, daar zou je wel daar kan je missie
Okay, I think we should stop you now from voting. It's almost the same as the previous one, so we have a kind of clear way to go forward with our strategy. Thank you for coming, and see you at the next session. The next session will be February 1, where the head of the CEO of Thales will be present. Thank you.